Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar about DMARC. What is it, and why should it be your next priority? Today's agenda, we'll be discussing an introduction to DMARC, what can DMARC do, how does DMARC work, some of the common challenges faced by implementing DMARC, and choosing the right DMARC provider. And following today's webinar, what are the next steps for you and where to go? So firstly, what is DMARC? DMARC gives back control to the domain owner and works with existing authentication protocols SPF and DKIM. These two protocols allow you to authenticate valid services sending on your behalf. SPF and DKIM are the mechanisms DMARC uses to verify legitimate emails being sent out on behalf of your domain. So, what are these protocols? SPF authentication is a record on your DNS where you're approving an IP to send on your behalf. DKIM is a protocol that uses asymmetric encryption to ensure the message has not been modified in transit. And finally, alignment. Alignment is when the SPF return path and DKIM signing domain align with the from address. So now we know what DMARC is. Why was DMARC created? Every day when we click send on our email client to send an email, SMTP is the protocol behind that. SMTP is the most widely used protocol to send and receive emails. It was created in 1982 and was developed with no security in mind, and inherently has no security in place. What does this mean? This means that anybody can send an email on someone's behalf unless they have a DMARC policy. This allows your domain to be used by services that are not permitted to use your domain or act on behalf of your organization. And this is a very simple process. And to spoof a domain, this can be done by a simple web search. Of course, for any business, this is a huge vulnerability that could leave their brand reputation, customers, and supply chain impacted. And this could result in financial costs or loss of customers. The FBI reported that business email compromise scams accounted for over $12 billion in losses. So, to protect businesses from these vulnerabilities, DMARC was created. DMARC was created in 2012 by several industry leaders, Google and Yahoo being amongst them. DMARC was created to give back control to the domain owner, and for the domain owner to have visibility of the services using their domain. DMARC also can stop unauthenticated senders sending on behalf of a domain with a DMARC policy of reject. So what can DMARC do? DMARC reports show you your virtual IT footprint along with the configuration of each particular service using your domain. DMARC reports are sent every 24 hours by receiving mail servers, and this will give you the reporting data needed to either configure your valid services or show you how your current policy is being enforced. DMARC can ensure only services you authorize to use your domain send on your behalf. And DMARC can also be used as an inbound gateway check at a gateway level. Once your valid services have been correctly configured with SPF and DKIM, and a DMARC policy of reject is in place, you can ensure your customers and your supply chain that you have closed another vulnerability of allowing unauthorized senders to send on your behalf. Finally, DMARC is a protocol that gives visibility and protection to your domain. With this visibility and control of sending services, we can take one step closer in making the internet a safer place. So, how does DMARC work? On my screen, you'll see a flowchart of how an email is sent with DMARC. So an email is sent, both SPF and DKIM are checked by the receiving server. And if the email passes either SPF or DKIM, then DMARC passes. If the email fails SPF and DKIM, the email fails DMARC. This is the reason why we need to ensure that SPF and DKIM are correctly set up for all legitimate services using your domain and sending on your behalf. DMARC works with SPF and DKIM, and using these two protocols to authenticate services sending on your behalf. As briefly mentioned before, DMARC also requires alignment from these two protocols, where the SPF return path and the from address have to match, and the same for the DKIM signing domain and the sending domain also have to match to make a DMARC alignment pass. This is why when we're moving into DMARC, we need to ensure that all of our valid assets are correctly configured. Using SPF and DKIM as an authentication mechanism on your valid assets, DMARC ensures any email that does not authenticate with SPF and DKIM will take the policies specified by your DMARC record from the sending domain. So how does a DMARC record look like? A DMARC record is a TXT record, as you can see on my screen. This record is typically entered into your DNS. And what does this record do? So we can see from on my screen, the current record that we have a P equals reject PCT 100, which means that we have a policy of reject any unauthenticated emails on behalf of this domain. We also have an RUA, which is an aggregated reporting address where DMARC XML reports will be sent every 24 hours. And we also have there an RUF address where forensic reports will be sent every 24 hours. This record, as you can see on my screen, contains a policy. And this is the policy we will use to enforce DMARC on services sending on behalf of your domain. With DMARC, there are three different types of policies. There are P equals none, P equals quarantine, and P equals reject. So what does each policy do? Each policy is different. The P equals none policy is the policy that requires no DMARC compliance. And this is where you only receive reports on services using your domain and no DMARC policy is being applied to failures. Quarantine is a policy that requires DMARC compliance. Emails which fail DMARC will more than likely be moved to a receiving user's spam folder. And finally, reject. This is a policy that also requires DMARC compliance and is the highest in DMARC. Reject is what most organizations would like to get to, where any email which fails DMARC with no SPF or DKIM is rejected from the receiving mail server. So how do DMARC reports look like? DMARC reports are sent every 24 hours. The report will contain senders sending on your behalf, authentication results, parsing mechanisms, DKIM or SPF, and IP addresses of the server which is using your domain to send out emails. And this is all sent in a raw format. The raw format of reporting data makes it very difficult to obtain the full value of these reports. And will also leave you with a full mailbox because each DMARC receiving server sends back a DMARC report. And this reporting data will help you identify valid assets within your organization, which may not be correctly configured, and also help you identify spoofing attacks on your domain. And on some occasions, you may even identify some shadow IT in your organization. So what are some of the common challenges that we see when implementing DMARC? Computing power is the only way to get insight from the complex and numerous DMARC XML reports. An organization will receive these reports on a daily basis, and with the power of computing, you can get the maximum value out of this data. Another common challenge is when going through this reporting data, you may find a number of services that are not correctly configured with SPF or DKIM. SPF has a strict limit of 10 DNS lookups to protect against denial of service attacks. And finally, overwhelming, a large and complex amount of information. As you briefly saw from my previous screen, an example of an XML DMARC report, it contains a lot of information. This requires a need for AI to do IP lookups, and the ease of ability of easily classifying your legitimate sources and classifying threats using your domain. So how can you choose the right DMARC provider, and what is it to look out for? So some of the top things that I would recommend to you to look out for are: check if the company you want to work with are ISO 27001 certified or have Cyber Essentials certificate. How is their DMARC record? Are they in a P equals reject policy themselves? What do existing case studies say about the organization you want to work with? And what does their roadmap look like? And what are their support services? Do they have a knowledge base limited to protocols, or is their knowledge base on specific services? Do they have a live chat? Do they have a compliance program? How will they take you from a P equals none policy to a P equals reject policy and support you along the way? And these are key things to look out for. An email system is not static, it's forever changing and dynamic. And this is why we need to choose our services carefully and choose the best service. So what makes a good DMARC product? Reporting and dashboards. You need to be able to see all the email validations taking place within your domain. The best tools will simplify this complex DMARC XML report so that you can quickly get an overview of the DMARC compliance of the emails being sent out on your behalf. Simple dashboards will enable you to easily identify any misconfigurations, as well as seeing the scale and frequency of spoofing attacks. A structured configuration. A clearly structured solution is important for organizations which do not have specialists in-house, DMARC expertise, or limited resources. The solution should help you confidently move you through the various stages of DMARC and help you get to a P equals reject policy with ease. DKIM and SPF management. Do they have a tool that can assist you in overcoming the 10 SPF lookup limit? And IP classification, the ability to use computing power and AI to validate sources and classify these sources. These are very important things in which make your DMARC journey much simpler and much easier. Finally, what are the next steps from today? Most companies offer free trials. So you can go ahead and sign up for a free trial, be provided your DMARC record, update your DNS with the DMARC record, and begin receiving reports from every 24 hours. Professional services. Is there someone there to answer your question every time you have one, or on a specific service, or in general on just DMARC? And it's always good to remember that cheap is not the best. DMARC is a project for as long as your business name and your domain name exist. You have to search for the right value for money. And finally, DMARC only solutions may be limiting. Firms offer other email domain services that are important, but it's always good to remember. You cannot replace DMARC. DMARC is the only protocol which will allow you to prevent illegitimate services sending on your behalf and reject them from the receiving mail server. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar about DMARC, what it is and what it can do for you and why it should be your next priority. I hope that you understood the importance of DMARC and how it's the only protocol that can assist you from preventing illegitimate services using your domain to send out on your behalf. And DMARC is a protocol that, with good reporting and a good reporting solution, you will ease to a DMARC policy of reject. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. I hope you enjoyed it